It was a calm evening when the Deputy Attorney General was driving back home after a long meeting at the state office. The road was quiet, and the city lights reflected softly on the smooth black car he drove. He wasn't in a hurry, and his mind was still busy with the files and cases he had reviewed earlier that day. To anyone watching, he looked like a simple man driving home, but in reality, he held one of the most powerful positions in the legal system. He had worked hard for years to earn respect, and his reputation was spotless. Yet, he lived his life with humility and never carried himself with arrogance. He enjoyed silence after long days, and this ride was supposed to be peaceful, but fate had other plans for him. As he approached a small junction, flashing red and blue lights suddenly filled his rear-view mirror. At first, he thought it might be an ambulance or an emergency vehicle, but soon he realized it was a police patrol car signaling him to pull over. With a calm heart, he guided his car to the side of the road, parked smoothly, and lowered his window. He was not worried because he knew he hadn't broken any traffic law. His seatbelt was fastened, the speed limit was followed, and his car registration was valid. Still, he respected the process and waited patiently. Two officers stepped out of the patrol car. They were not in a rush, in fact, they walked slowly, with a kind of swagger that suggested authority. Their flashlights shone directly into his face even though the street lights were bright enough. One of them leaned against the car door casually, while the other stood firm, hand resting near his belt. Their expressions carried something more than professional duty, it was arrogance. They did not greet him politely or ask for his license in a civil tone. Instead, their words were sharp, dismissive, and full of judgment. "What are you doing in this car at this time of night?" one officer demanded, his voice raised as if the man had already committed a crime. The other officer smirked, whispering something under his breath that carried a tone of mockery. They asked questions without waiting for answers, doubting why he was driving such a polished car, hinting that it didn't suit him. The Deputy Attorney General remained calm, speaking only when necessary, his tone respectful and measured. He explained politely that he was returning home after official work, but they ignored his words as if they carried no value. The more he stayed calm, the more they seemed to grow impatient. They spoke in a way that made it clear they didn't see him as an equal human being but as someone they could belittle without consequence. The passers-by slowed their cars, some staring curiously, others shaking their heads at the scene. A few pedestrians on the sidewalk even paused to see what was happening. Whispers began, some said it looked unfair, but no one had the courage to step in. Everyone had seen such scenes before, where ordinary citizens had no power against uniformed officers. Inside the car, the Deputy Attorney General reached for a small button near his dashboard. Without anyone noticing, his dash camera came alive, quietly recording the entire scene, every word, every expression, and every insult. He was not recording out of anger or desire for revenge. He simply believed in truth, and truth needed evidence. He had spent his life fighting for justice in courtrooms, where every small piece of proof mattered. Tonight, he was not acting as a powerful official but as an ordinary man who knew the importance of keeping calm. The officers continued their questioning, asking him where he was coming from, why he was out so late, and even suggesting he might be involved in activities that did not suit the kind of car he drove. Their words carried a sting, not because he had done anything wrong, but because they showed prejudice. Still, he did not react with anger. He looked them in the eye with steady calmness, and sometimes he even gave a faint smile, which only made them more irritated. To them, his silence seemed like defiance, but in truth, it was strength. The tension grew thicker with each passing minute. The road, once quiet, now had a small audience. Cars slowed to record with mobile phones, capturing snippets of the encounter. A woman walking her dog pulled out her phone too, shaking her head at the treatment she was witnessing. The officers, blinded by their own authority, did not realize how many eyes were now watching them. They had no idea that their behavior was not only being seen in person but would soon be shared far beyond this quiet street. The Deputy Attorney General shifted slightly in his seat, adjusting his tie and taking a deep breath. He could have ended the situation right there by revealing his identity, by pulling out his government ID, or by calling a higher authority. But he chose not to. He wanted to see how far these men would go when they thought they were dealing with someone powerless. He wanted to see the truth of their character revealed without influence. For him, this was not just a personal test but also a reminder of the challenges many citizens faced daily, citizens who did not have titles or authority to protect them. Minutes passed, and the insults continued. Yet, his calmness never wavered. His patience was his shield, and his quiet dignity stood taller than the arrogance in front of him. The scene, though heavy with injustice, was also filled with suspense. No one knew who he truly was, not even the officers humiliating him. The audience on the street saw only a simple man being treated unfairly, but soon the truth would shake everyone present. In that moment, as the night breeze brushed against his face and the flashing lights painted the road in red and blue, the Deputy Attorney General thought silently to himself, "Justice always reveals itself, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly." Tonight would be one of those nights where truth, patience, and dignity would prove stronger than arrogance and insult. And as the officers prepared to take the encounter even further, none of them realized they were standing at the edge of a turning point, one that would not only change their lives but also serve as a lesson to everyone watching. The officers grew bolder as the minutes passed. They leaned closer to the car window, their voices sharper now, filled with suspicion and superiority. One of them tapped the side of the car with his flashlight, as though trying to intimidate the man inside. The other folded his arms and smirked, his tone mocking whenever he spoke. They were not interested in listening, they only wanted to display power. To them, this was just another routine stop where they could talk down to someone they assumed was powerless. They began asking questions that had nothing to do with traffic rules. "Where did you get this car? Do you even own it? Who gave it to you?" one officer demanded, as though the driver had stolen it. The Deputy Attorney General, still calm and respectful, answered each question with clarity. He explained he was returning from work, that the car belonged to him, and that his documents were in perfect order. But his words only seemed to feed their arrogance. They exchanged glances, their tone growing louder, and they laughed under their breath as if they were enjoying the discomfort they believed they were causing. The insults soon became personal. They began questioning not just his car but his very presence on that road at night. One of them accused him of pretending to be something he was not, hinting that people like him did not belong in a luxury car or certain neighborhoods. Their voices carried a sting, but he did not let it pierce his calm. He had been in countless courtrooms where tempers ran hotter, where lawyers shouted, and judges demanded order. Compared to that, this was just noise. Yet deep down, he could not ignore the reality these were not just insults, they were reflections of prejudice. On the sidewalks, more people stopped to watch. Some shook their heads in disbelief at the way the officers were speaking. A young man quietly pulled out his phone and began recording the entire scene, keeping his distance but determined to capture what was happening. Another driver slowed down and rolled down her window just enough to hear the officer's tone. Whispers spread in the small crowd, "Why are they treating him like that? He hasn't done anything wrong. This looks unfair." But the officers, lost in their own arrogance, did not notice the eyes around them. They continued pressing him with baseless accusations. They told him to step out of the car. He complied without resistance, opening the door slowly and standing tall under the flashing lights. His suit was neat, his shoes polished, and his posture calm. He looked like a man of dignity, but they treated him as if he were a suspect caught in wrongdoing. One officer circled him like a predator, shining the flashlight up and down his body, while the other kept asking questions without waiting for answers. The Deputy Attorney General did not flinch. He stood steady, hands visible, voice low and respectful. Inside his mind, he was weighing every moment, every word. He was not angry, but he was deeply thoughtful. He knew the scene was larger than himself. This was not just about one stop, it was about the kind of abuse that so many others faced in silence. He could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He could end it right there by revealing who he was, but he chose patience. He wanted the truth of their behavior to be exposed in its rawest form. The insults grew more direct. One officer mocked his voice, while the other accused him of being out of place. They even suggested that he might be involved in illegal activities, simply because of the car he drove and the way he looked. It was an attack without evidence, without logic, born only from prejudice. The Deputy Attorney General answered each accusation softly but firmly, never raising his tone. He refused to let anger rule the moment. The tension was heavy in the air. Cars passing by slowed almost to a crawl, headlights shining on the scene like spotlights. The flashing police lights painted the night in red and blue, giving the entire situation a sense of drama. People recording on their phones knew something significant was unfolding. Some whispered that the man seemed unusually calm for someone being treated so badly. Others speculated quietly about who he might really be. At one point, one of the officers pushed harder, threatening to take him to the station for questioning. The words were filled with pride, as though the threat itself was a victory. The Deputy Attorney General simply nodded, as though he had nothing to fear. His calmness unsettled them, though they didn't show it. They expected fear, excuses, or anger. Instead, they found silence and dignity, which only made their own arrogance shine brighter in contrast. The young man recording with his phone whispered to a nearby pedestrian, "This doesn't feel right. He's too composed. Something about him seems different." But no one could have guessed his true identity. The officers themselves remained blind to it, lost in their own authority. Minutes turned into nearly half an hour. The Deputy Attorney General was asked the same questions again and again, as if repetition would reveal something false. He gave the same steady answers, never faltering. His patience was remarkable, his quiet strength a shield that frustrated the officers without them even realizing it. The crowd of onlookers grew slightly larger, their whispers growing louder. Some even muttered about reporting the officers themselves. But the Deputy Attorney General still said nothing about who he was. He allowed the scene to unfold naturally, knowing that every second was being recorded by his dash camera, by the young man across the street, by drivers slowing down, and by others who now sensed the injustice. The night air was cool, the breeze brushing gently against him as he stood under the flashing lights. Inside his mind, he reflected on his journey, how hard he had worked, how many challenges he had faced to rise to his position. He had faced bias before, though rarely so openly. But tonight, he was not thinking of himself alone. He was thinking of the countless others who had no hidden camera, no powerful title, no shield of authority to protect them. For them, his silence tonight was not weakness but strength. He knew the truth was on his side, and truth always found a way to rise. The officers, still unaware of the storm that was quietly building around them, pushed the scene toward its breaking point. Their insults grew harsher, their tone more threatening. Yet with each word, they only dug themselves deeper into a hole of their own making. They believed they were in control, but in reality, they were being watched, recorded, and silently judged by everyone around. As the Deputy Attorney General stood there, calm and dignified, he knew the moment of revelation was approaching. The night was far from over, and the truth was waiting to be spoken. But for now, he remained silent, letting arrogance play its role, letting the world see injustice with its own eyes. He knew that when the truth finally came out, it would not just shake the two officers, it would echo far beyond that quiet street. The night had grown heavier with tension. The flashing red and blue lights kept dancing against the walls of nearby buildings, painting shadows that flickered like restless ghosts. The Deputy Attorney General stood patiently outside his car, still calm, his posture strong and unwavering. The officers thought they had full control over the situation, yet they did not realize the moment of truth was slowly approaching. The crowd around them was larger now, with drivers slowing down and pedestrians whispering. Cameras were recording from multiple angles, but the officers remained blind to everything except their own arrogance. One of the officers leaned closer, his voice sharp. "We've had enough of your silence," he said, raising his chin. "You think you can stand here and outsmart us?" His partner laughed, shaking his head. They were certain they had cornered him, and that soon he would break. But instead, the Deputy Attorney General reached calmly into his pocket, pulled out a slim leather wallet, and flipped it open. His hand was steady as he extended the card inside toward the officers. At first, they didn't even bother to look. They smirked as though it was just another attempt by a frightened man to get out of trouble. But then their eyes caught the golden seal, the clear print, and the official designation. The words shone in the harsh beam of their flashlight, Deputy Attorney General. Their confident expressions froze, their voices fell silent, and the air seemed to shift instantly. The crowd gasped. Whispers turned into loud murmurs. "Did he just say Deputy Attorney General?" someone asked in shock. The young man recording zoomed in on the card, his hand trembling as he realized what this meant. A woman across the street covered her mouth in disbelief. The arrogance that had filled the officers' faces just moments ago drained away, replaced by pale shock. The Deputy Attorney General looked directly at them, his eyes calm but firm. For the first time that night, he spoke in a tone that carried weight, a voice filled not with anger but with authority. "I gave you respect," he said evenly, "yet you chose to insult me. Not because of what I did, but because of what you assumed." His words were steady, each syllable echoing louder than the sirens still flashing. "This is not about me. This is about the law. And the law does not excuse arrogance or prejudice." The officers stumbled, their voices trembling as they tried to explain themselves. "We were just doing our job," one muttered, his earlier boldness gone. The other cleared his throat nervously, eyes darting to the growing crowd. But no excuse could erase what everyone had just witnessed. The dash camera had captured everything. The pedestrians' phones had captured everything. The truth was now undeniable. The Deputy Attorney General slowly placed his wallet back into his pocket. He did not shout, nor did he threaten. He simply looked at them with quiet disappointment. "Your duty," he said, "is to protect and serve. Not to insult, not to humiliate, not to misuse the power given to you." His words cut deeper than anger ever could. The officers lowered their heads, realizing the ground beneath them had shifted. The crowd, emboldened by the revelation, began speaking louder. "Shame on them," someone called out. "He's the Deputy Attorney General, and they treated him like that." Another voice rose, "If this can happen to him, what about ordinary people like us?" The weight of those words filled the air. It was no longer just a confrontation, it was a moment of reckoning. The Deputy Attorney General, still calm, turned back toward his car. He placed one hand on the door, then paused. His voice was clear, directed at the officers. "I will not take this further here. But know this, justice has a way of finding its place. Always." Then he sat inside, started the engine, and prepared to leave. But before driving away, he rolled the window down one last time. "The law will remember tonight," he said firmly. And with that, he drove off, leaving the flashing lights, the stunned officers, and the murmuring crowd behind. The two officers stood frozen, their arrogance completely shattered. They looked at each other, pale and shaken, realizing the full weight of what had just happened. They had not only insulted a high-ranking legal official, but they had also done so in front of cameras, witnesses, and the cold eye of evidence that would not lie. The crowd slowly dispersed, but the whispers continued. People were already sending videos online, uploading them to social media with captions filled with outrage. Within minutes, the incident began spreading far beyond the street where it happened. Clips of the officers mocking the Deputy Attorney General were already making their way across digital platforms, shared with anger and disbelief. The truth had left the street and was now racing across the city. Inside his car, the Deputy Attorney General drove steadily, his face thoughtful. He was not satisfied by the humiliation of the officers. He was not a man who sought revenge. But he felt a heavy responsibility. Tonight had revealed something bigger than himself. The arrogance and prejudice of two officers had been exposed, and now justice had to follow. He knew the storm was only beginning. The officers, meanwhile, returned to their patrol car, their hands shaking slightly. "What have we done?" one whispered, panic in his eyes. The other pressed his hands against the steering wheel, his throat dry. They tried to reassure themselves, saying maybe the Deputy Attorney General would let it go, maybe he would not push it further. But deep down, they knew the truth. The evidence was everywhere, on cameras, on phones, and most importantly, in the memory of the man they had insulted. The night grew quieter again, but the silence was heavy, filled with the weight of consequences waiting to arrive. The officers had believed they were untouchable. Now they stood at the edge of a downfall they could not stop. The revelation had changed everything. Their arrogance had collapsed in seconds, and what remained was fear. As the Deputy Attorney General's car disappeared down the road, his words lingered in the air like an unshakable echo, "The law will remember tonight." Those words were not just for them, they were for everyone watching, everyone recording, and everyone who would see the truth. They were a promise that justice, though patient, always arrives. And as the crowd uploaded the last of their videos and the night returned to quietness, the story was already no longer confined to that street. It had become a spark, ready to ignite across the city and beyond. The officers did not know it yet, but their lives had just changed forever. The tragic end to their arrogance had begun, and the wheels of justice were already turning. The night after the encounter did not remain quiet. What had taken place on that dimly lit street quickly began spreading across the city like wildfire. By the time the Deputy Attorney General reached his home, the videos recorded by onlookers had already found their way onto social media. Clips of the two officers mocking him, dismissing him, and insulting him had gone viral. The words that once echoed only on the roadside now echoed across millions of screens. People were shocked, outraged, and deeply moved by the injustice they saw with their own eyes. News stations picked up the story almost instantly. By the following morning, the headlines were everywhere: Deputy Attorney General stopped and humiliated by officers, video of police misconduct goes viral, arrogance caught on camera. The incident became the central topic in homes, offices, and schools. Ordinary citizens felt anger, not just for the official involved but for themselves. Many said, if this can happen to a man of his position, what happens to us who have no power? It touched a nerve deep inside society. Meanwhile, at the state office, phones rang non-stop. Colleagues of the Deputy Attorney General were stunned. Some who had known him for years could not believe he had faced such humiliation in silence. Others admired his patience and dignity in the face of such behavior. Senior officials, including judges, attorneys, and even legislators, expressed outrage. They demanded answers. The Attorney General himself called for an immediate review of the footage. By midday, an official investigation had begun. The police department faced intense pressure from every side. Reporters camped outside their headquarters, waiting for statements. The chief of police was forced to hold a press conference, promising the matter would be taken seriously. He appeared uncomfortable, his words carefully measured. "We will not tolerate misconduct in this department," he said. but his strained tone revealed the storm raging behind closed doors. The two officers at the center of the scandal felt the weight of the world closing in on them. Their names, once unknown, were now splashed across headlines and screens. They had become infamous overnight. Calls flooded the department demanding their suspension. Inside their homes, their families faced shame and disbelief. Friends distanced themselves. Neighbors whispered. What had once been arrogance and confidence now turned into isolation and fear. The Deputy Attorney General, however, remained quiet. He went to work as usual, his face calm, his words steady. Reporters tried to reach him, but he did not rush to give interviews. He did not need to. The videos spoke louder than anything he could say. His silence only added to his dignity. In private, though, he prepared his notes carefully. He knew the investigation would require his input, and he wanted to ensure that the truth was presented with clarity, not emotion. The public demanded more. Protests began forming outside the police department, citizens holding signs calling for justice and accountability. People of every background joined, united by the belief that power should not be misused. They chanted for fairness, for reform, and for respect. Their voices grew louder with each passing day. The incident had become more than just one man's story, it had become a symbol of something larger. Inside the police department, tension was unbearable. Fellow officers looked at the two men differently now. Some avoided them entirely. Others muttered that they had brought shame on the entire force. The two men tried to defend themselves, saying it was a misunderstanding, that their actions were taken out of context. But the videos told a different story, one that could not be erased. Their arrogance on that night was clear in every frame, and their downfall seemed unavoidable. The investigation committee, led by senior legal officials, gathered evidence. They reviewed dash camera footage from the Deputy Attorney General's car. They studied every video posted online. They interviewed witnesses who had been present that night. Each testimony painted the same picture: two officers who had insulted and humiliated a man without reason, blinded by prejudice and arrogance. When the Deputy Attorney General was called to testify, the room fell silent. Everyone leaned in, waiting for his words. He spoke calmly, as he always did. He recounted the incident step by step, never exaggerating, never raising his voice. He explained how he had chosen patience, not because he was weak, but because he believed truth reveals itself without force. He ended with words that moved everyone present: "This is not about me. It is about what happens when authority is misused. If justice does not act today, tomorrow someone else will suffer the same treatment. And that cannot be allowed." Those words spread far beyond the walls of the committee room. They were quoted in newspapers, shared on television, and repeated by citizens. His calm dignity became a source of inspiration. People admired not just his position but his character. He had turned humiliation into a lesson, insult into strength, and silence into power. For the two officers, the days grew darker. Their suspension came quickly, announced publicly by the department. They were told to hand in their badges and guns while the investigation continued. Their neighbors watched as they left home each morning with bowed heads. Their children faced questions at school they could not answer. The shame was unbearable. The men who once strutted with confidence in their uniforms now walked like shadows of themselves. Social media did not forgive them. Every day, new comments appeared, condemning their behavior. Memes, videos, and articles spread, each one a reminder of their actions. Their names became symbols of disgrace. No apology seemed enough. Even when they issued statements claiming regret, the public dismissed them. Regret is easy when you are caught, people said. Respect should have been shown from the beginning. The Deputy Attorney General, though quiet, continued his work. Behind the scenes, he pushed for reforms. He met with legal teams, discussed new policies, and urged for stricter accountability in law enforcement. His goal was not to destroy individuals but to strengthen the system, to ensure that no citizen would face such treatment again. He knew change would take time, but he was willing to fight for it. The story did not fade. It grew larger. National media picked it up, and soon it became a subject of debate in parliaments, universities, and community halls. Scholars discussed the meaning of dignity in the face of injustice. Teachers used it as a lesson for students about patience and truth. The incident had transformed into something beyond anyone's imagination. The officers who once believed themselves untouchable now faced the reality of accountability. The tragic end of their arrogance was no longer just personal, it was public. They had misused their authority, and now they bore the weight of consequences that spread far beyond their own lives. And through it all, the Deputy Attorney General remained steady. His calmness had turned into strength for others. His silence had become a voice for justice. The man who had been stopped and insulted on a quiet night had, without raising his hand or voice, reminded an entire nation of a simple truth: power is not in arrogance, but in dignity. The investigation was still ongoing, but the outcome was becoming clear. The world had already judged, and the law was catching up. The tragic fall of arrogance was no longer a possibility, it was an unfolding reality. And in every home, every conversation, people repeated the same thought: justice may take time, but it always arrives. The weeks that followed brought a wave of consequences that no one could have predicted on that quiet night when the stop first happened. The Deputy Attorney General kept to his usual routine, quietly attending meetings, preparing legal briefs, and visiting the courtroom when required. But beyond his calm exterior, the ripple of that one incident had shaken the entire community. What started as two officers displaying arrogance and prejudice had now grown into a nationwide story of justice, responsibility, and truth. The investigation into the officers moved quickly because of the overwhelming public pressure. Every piece of evidence was reviewed again and again. The dash camera footage was sharp and clear, showing their tone, their words, and their behavior. The videos from pedestrians and drivers filled in every angle. Together, the recordings painted a picture that could not be denied. The conclusion was simple: the officers had abused their authority, insulted a citizen without reason, and shown behavior that was unacceptable in the line of duty. The announcement of their dismissal came on a bright morning. The chief of police, with a heavy face, stood before cameras and admitted that the department had failed to uphold its duty that night. "These officers are hereby terminated from service," he said, his voice low, each word carrying the weight of shame. Reporters rushed to capture his statement. Citizens cheered outside the department building. On social media, people shared the news with satisfaction. Many called it justice. Others said it was a warning that no one, not even those in uniform, could escape accountability when they misused power. For the two officers, life took a tragic turn. The dismissal was not just the end of their jobs, it was the end of their reputations. They had once worn their uniforms with pride, walking the streets as symbols of authority. Now, they could not step outside without whispers following them. Their neighbors looked at them differently. Their families felt the sting of shame. Even their friends hesitated to stand beside them. Opportunities disappeared. No other department wanted to hire them, no company wanted to be associated with their names. One of them grew bitter, blaming the world for his downfall. He argued that the cameras had ruined him, that people had exaggerated the incident. But deep down, he knew the truth: it was his own arrogance that had led him here. The other officer, however, sank into silence. He stopped speaking much, avoided crowds, and spent his days replaying the moment when the Deputy Attorney General had revealed his identity. The shock, the disappointment in the man's voice, and the crowd's reaction haunted him like an echo he could never escape. Meanwhile, the Deputy Attorney General continued to show remarkable dignity. He did not celebrate their downfall, nor did he seek revenge. He remained focused on his work. When reporters asked him for comments, he always repeated the same simple message: this is not about individuals. It is about justice. It is about ensuring that authority is used for protection, not insult. His calm words made him a symbol of integrity. People across the country praised him, not only for his position but for his character. Community leaders began inviting him to speak at events. At universities, students filled halls to hear him share his experience. He told them about patience, about dignity, and about the importance of standing firm without anger. Power, he told them, is not in the loudness of your voice, but in the steadiness of your truth. His words inspired countless young people, reminding them that strength does not always show itself in force, it often shows itself in restraint. The case of the two officers became a lesson for the entire police force. Training programs were updated. Officers were reminded again and again that their uniforms were symbols of service, not superiority. The tragic downfall of two men became an example shown in classrooms, in workshops, and in community discussions. People said their arrogance had cost them everything, and it was a warning to others never to let pride and prejudice guide their actions. But for the Deputy Attorney General, the incident remained personal in another way. At home, with his family, he reflected often on what had happened. He thought of how easy it would have been to lose his patience that night, to react with anger. Yet he knew that his calmness had been the strongest response. Dignity disarms arrogance, he said once to his children, teaching them that patience was not weakness but wisdom. His family admired him even more, seeing how he had turned insult into an opportunity for justice. In the end, the officers' downfall was not just about losing their jobs, it was about losing the trust of the people they had sworn to serve. That was the deepest tragedy. Without trust, their badges had meant nothing. Without respect, their authority had collapsed like sand in the wind. The crowd that once feared their flashing lights now only remembered them with pity and disappointment. Their names became lessons in failure, reminders of what happens when arrogance is chosen over duty. The city slowly returned to its routine, but the memory of that night remained alive. People still spoke about it in cafes, schools, and offices. The videos continued to circulate online, reaching even more viewers around the world. It was no longer just a story of two officers and one official, it had become a symbol of truth prevailing over arrogance, of justice standing taller than prejudice. For the Deputy Attorney General, the road ahead was clear. He would continue to fight for fairness, to push for reforms, and to serve with humility. His journey was not about fame, but about principle. And though he never sought the spotlight found him because of his character. As for the officers, their tragic end was not in the loss of their jobs alone. It was in the realization that their choices had destroyed their own futures. The uniforms they once wore with confidence were gone, replaced by the weight of regret. Their story served as a reminder to all: power misused is power lost, and arrogance always leads to downfall. And so, the story closed not with revenge, but with a lesson that echoed far beyond the night it began. A man of dignity had shown that patience is stronger than insult, that truth is louder than arrogance, and that justice, though sometimes slow, always arrives.